This is Crystal Castles, released in 1984 for the Atari 2600 video computer system and based on the 1983 Atari arcade game of the same name. A game that I first played not on the Atari 2600 but rather on the original Atari Flashback plug-and-play console from 2004, which if you've never seen it, is a mini 7800 looking thing with 20 built-in Atari games. But unlike later flashback units, the original flashback was essentially an NES-on-a-chip Famiclone device, which meant the games neither looked nor played as they did on original Atari hardware, which left me with a less than stellar first impression of Crystal Castles. Now I do have the original cart, but for the sake of convenience on my end, we're playing this on the Atari 50 compilation that was released last year I believe, and quick digression, Atari 50 is probably the best thing Atari has put out in recent memory. Superb compilation of various Atari games spanning various Atari platforms, as well as being a decent historical documentary of sorts. Well worth checking out if you're into that sort of thing, but back to Crystal Castles for the 2600. As you can probably tell on screen, this is a sort of Pac-Man inspired maze game done in an isometric perspective somewhat. You control Bentley Bear, the main character, and your goal is to collect all the gems on screen, use your imagination younglings, while avoiding all the critters. You can move around the board in 8 directions, you have a jump button that can be used to evade enemies, and some levels even sport lifts that carry you or take you to a higher level or downwards or whatever, so long as you nail the timing, because they may look like ladders, but I assure you they are not ladders that you could climb freely. The denizens of Crystal Castles, which comprise 8 unique levels, are a rather aggressive lot. Some will mind their own business, but others will pursue you to the ends of the earth. It only takes one bad touch to lose a bear, but fortunately there's a couple power-ups that might help. The most helpful being the Witch's Hat, which grants you limited invulnerability and also lets you kill witches by touching them. The other, less useful power-up, shall we say, the Honey Jar, will prevent bee swarms from diving onto the field for a short while, but otherwise serves as a nice little score boost. And that's all there is to it. It's a fairly simplistic game, as most games were from this day and age, and Crystal Castles is certainly a different take on the eat-all gimmicks on-screen maze game type with a different perspective, and it's a fairly fun one at that. The game offers 8 different levels for you to challenge, and you can pick which one you want to start off on from the title screen, and toggling the difficulty switch will let you control how aggressive enemies are. Not much in the way of game variations, but the core gameplay is pretty solid. Well, okay, sometimes it'll be easy to get stuck in corners, which is mighty inconvenient when you're swarmed by enemies, and sometimes the controls can be a bit too stiff for its own good, but otherwise works fairly well, and the hit detection is surprisingly generous here, especially in regards to moving around enemies and jumping around them and all that. So that's something, I suppose. Crystal Castles looks fairly decent by 2600 standards. It's not the prettiest looking thing, mind you, but the various level layouts look fine. The smallish characters are fairly easy to identify, most of them anyway, and yes, there's also quite a considerable amount of sprite flicker, which is to be expected with old hardware like this. In terms of sound, Crystal Castles is more than adequate. There's a couple of jingles that play between levels and they sound fine. The various sound effects are typical Atari stock sound effects that sound decidedly stock Atari sound effects. Make of that what you will, but at least it's not audibly offensive. Overall, Crystal Castles is what I would call perfectly acceptable fare on the Atari 2600. It's a fun twist on a familiar game genre, there's multiple levels, and in terms of replicating the arcade experience, it does a more than admirable job. Once you get the hangs of the stiffness of the controls, Crystal Castles can be a good time had by all. Fun game this.